We're excited to finally get our hands on the Model 3 and also to see the future of where KLH is heading.
KLH was established in 1957 and pioneered by Henry Claus. His now famous acoustic suspension designs have now been modernized with the new KLH Model 3s and 5s. Acoustic suspension speaker designs are rarely seen in today's speakers. How do they stack up? Let's find out. Welcome to Hi-Fi. I'm Marcos, this is Kurt, and today we're finally reviewing the KLH Model 3s. The KLH Model 3s are a two-way acoustic suspension design speaker, featuring an 8-inch paper woofer and a 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter, rated at 6 ohms with 150 watts power handling, 88 decibel sensitivity as well. They feature a 3-position balance control on the back of the speaker, so you can kind of fine-tune their sound to suit your room. Available in 2 different finishes as well, English walnut and mahogany, and they come in at a price of around $2,700 Canadian or $1,800 American, including the stands.
Out of all the speakers that kind of go back to this retro styling, this is one of my favorites. One of the ones that really stands out is the way they did the grill on there. I think it looks really dates back kind of in that era. It's also the little things like this here, because usually what happens is if they're going to throw like a modern day aluminum driver on there, like 1-inch tweeter, it's usually stands out. It doesn't look like it goes back from that era. Putting this aluminum trim on here kind of makes it look like those 2 or 3-inch cone tweeter drivers that were used previously before, way back in the past. So they did a really good job keeping that looks on there.
One thing I really like about the Model 3s is, it has that awesome vintage look that kind of works really well in even some of today's really modern homes. With the Model 3 especially, it's really small, so you could even fit it into a condo or a smaller room, no problem, and it'll look good and not look like it's a whole bookcase. Another thing I really like about the Model 3s is the fact that KLH decided to include the stands with all the speakers, so you don't have to buy them separately. It's a all-in-one package. I find it suits the design really well.
We usually don't include a setup section in the speaker because it's always kind of more relevant to your room. However, in this case, I think we need to touch on it because upon early listening, when we're first listening, we just kind of put it in our normal positioning, which is more of an equilateral triangle. And we did notice that the image just seemed a little bit lower than we would like. And then that's when we came in to play around with different positionings. And one thing that we found, and also in the manual as well, is that they actually want it quite farther back. So, they recommended say about 6 feet apart, and it'd be about 9 feet back in your listening position. So quite far from your normal equilateral triangle that a lot of times we're accustomed to setting up in this room.
Toe-in wise, we found optimal performance was around 3 to 4 degrees, so not a lot of toe-in, and we found they performed really well at that. The other interesting part about the Model 3, since they're not vented whatsoever, in the manual they actually recommend you can place them up to 6 inches against the wall. So it is a very easy speaker to set up, really. And they're very flexible to set up in many different spaces. Overall, I thought the Model 3s actually performed really quite well. For such a small speaker, they have pretty amazing bass extension, I found. And the top end clarity is nice and clean to me.
What they did out of such a small speaker is very impressive, and you'll see that later on in our measurements. What might throw a little people off is that how it sits on the floor, and you think it might deteriorate some of that performance. That's what we talked about earlier. As long as you set it up right, you'll be fine. And because the off-axis response was another really big strength of the speaker, it's really okay. So even if you're listening to far back, or kind of off to the side. The performance of that is really strong. And one thing that we'll talk about is the quality of the bass. And I really like how this kind of acoustic suspension sounds. It's just got so much texture and so much control over the bass in this speaker.
We performed our classic dB test on the Model 3s, around 60 to 65 dB, normal conversation level. I found, yeah, the bass response was really good. It was very apparent. It filled our listening space quite well. I also found it was easy to hear all the top end notes. They were nicely detailed. It was a pretty nice listen, even at low volumes. Another cool part with the Model 3s, especially for low volume listening, is the fact that you can adjust the way they sound to best suit the listening style. So at lower volumes, you can turn it on to high, so you get a little bit more of that upper end detail and a little bit less of that bass presence.
And I'll say especially in nighttime listening, because in nighttime listening, you're going to even run it at like 50 dBs. So just so if you want to be able to really hear everything and not disturb anyone upstairs, yeah, I just say flick that switch up, is it to the mid level or the
high level,
or the high level, and you're good to go. In the higher level listening, in this size cabinet, was very impressive. The bass was still really impactful and didn't break up, even in that 80 dBs. And I would say in between that 79 to 82 dBs, you know, this can play it all day long from our 13-foot listening position. We also hit a peak of, I'll say, going 88, 90 dBs from our listening position. But overall, I want to say that kind of results in this size speaker is exceptional.
When it came to listening to music on the Model 3s, we listened to a wide variety as always. The two that stood out to us today was Everything But the Girl, Walking Wounded. I was listening to the song over the weekend, and then I really want to hear it again on the Model 3s. I just really enjoy this early drum and bass song. To me, it really does it all for me. The thing that stood out to me with the Model 3s was just how well the bass was controlled with this song. It hit every note with pretty good impact for such a small speaker, and it also had a really nice extension as well. The other thing I noticed too was on the upper end, the notes were very well detailed, the vocals were detailed, and you could kind of hear the space around her voice too.
One thing that stood out in this track with me, and what kind of brings up for this speaker, is the way it was able to image everything. Sometimes when you have kind of like larger, wider cabinets, they just don't have a pinpoint imaging, I find. But in this case, it really does. You know, when her vocals, when she's singing, what they would do is she would sing and they would fade off some of her voice into the left side just to kind of create this kind of neat effect. You could really tell what they were trying to do in that mix and how they did it, and it sounded really good. And also too, they had a little bit of a synthesized, kind of like a digital effects that were just it's kind of like just playing in the background. It was where it should be. It should have been deep into the stage, really spread everything around, and it did it. It did a good job.
The second song we listened to by Dizzy Gillespie, is it Gillespie or Gillespie? Let us know in the comments. On the Sunny Side of the Street, I really like this song. To me, it's kind of like the perfect image of spring. It's really lightweight sounding. It's really bouncy sounding. I really just like the vibe of that song. I found with the Model 3s, it sounded accurate. You could really pinpoint all the instruments on the stage. The double bass to me really sounded really nice and detailed to me with the Model 3s. And yeah, it just really got me sinking into the recording.
Same thing stood out with me again on this track. So even if the speakers, you know, it's funny because when you visually look at it, it all sits lower. But again, if you follow the right positioning, you really throws up a good stage. This track is really neat because you've got kind of the percussion, the vocalist, and the bass all on the right side. And then on the left side, you got the horns. And what was really neat about this is the speakers was able to really distinctly position everything properly and beyond the speaker, which it should be. So it didn't sound like it was coming right in front of the speaker. So creating that kind of disappearing act on this track.
When it came to measuring the Model 3s, I was actually pretty amazed on how well the Model 3s measured compared to the measurements that KLH actually published as the specs for the speaker, which is around 46 hertz to 20,000 hertz, and our measurements measured right up to that. So it was pretty nice to see that company would actually put the real measurements out there.
Very similar to our PMCs, especially in the bass region. It's surprisingly close. When you can see from the overlay, it's quite smooth. Of course, we had that normal hump, but that's partly because of the room. But I think it's, you know, for me, our reference speaker, bass quality is really good, and it's not really peaky. It's quite smooth on there, and this did it. I think it's because of that acoustic suspension. Some of the difference from our baseline system. You'll notice that the mids, kind of like, well, I was saying the 1 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz range. I think that's why you can see that perception of kind of openness and detail in the speaker that it has. You can see it is more pronounced on the speaker. So things will definitely sound, you know, maybe a tad bit more forward than what we have in our controlled speakers. And the top end. So the thing is, with the top end, as compared to our speakers, what happens is it just has a nice gradual roll off. And also too, but remember, all this stuff can be fixed. We did all these measurements in the mid, and you can play, depending on how live your room is, you'll be able to play with those adjustments in the back and move up the frequency response, because it affects the range all the way from 400 hertz and above.
When it came to comparing the Model 3s to different speakers out there, there's no direct comparisons, but our closest comparison would be the Wharfedale Lintons, of course.
What's really going to be neat about this, when you're comparing the two, between the Lintons and the speaker, they all go back to that traditional side in terms of design, but in terms of sound, it's quite different. Having that kind of larger size front width on the cabinets there gives you that similar sound, but I would say this sounds like more of a modern day speaker, or a little bit closer to that. And the Lintons would sound, I would say it's not technically as good, but I think that's the thing with Lintons, and I think that's why people fall in love with the Lintons, is that they like that it's not so perfect, because we know so many people just in our own circle of audio people that they love it because of that. Here in the KLH overall, I would say when it comes to transparency, I would say, again, all the technical aspects in terms of the bass and how textured and how the quality of the bass, it sounds like, I'll tell you, it sounds like a more higher end speaker. So for a lot of people like that, it's gonna suit them a lot more.
One other thing with the Model 3s compared to the Lintons is the fact that the Model 3s are quite a bit easier to place in multiple different settings. They're smaller form factor, and height-wise, the fact they're not ported means you can place them closer to the wall than the Lintons. So overall, the Model 3s are a little bit better suited for many different styles of homes as well.
Another one we'll compare it to is the M106 by Revel. We haven't done a formal review on it, but we know the sound of the speaker very well, and how it sounds. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's just now completely, let's see how it compares to the same price in a modern day speaker. And overall, every time you have a slimmer cabinet, you always hear less cabinet stuff coming out of the cabinets. On a speaker like that, it's going to sound a lot, like, even more precise, I would say, especially on the imaging, and even maybe let's say even more technically correct. What the KLH will give you though is that that bass, that feeling of just more extension and feeling and filling up the room, is where this is really gonna, I would say, going to excel. And when you're listening to some, like a lot of those old, like the jazz, like what we were listening earlier today, to that jazz, it just, I don't know, I just like the way, like, brings out like a soul from a speaker like this, that some of these modern day speakers just really just don't.
Compared to the Revel M106, which is a really modern design speaker, I find the KLH, yeah, just has a little bit more of that body, a little bit more of that soul, especially when listening to those older recordings. And I think it's just a lot of that bass presence, right? Is there. Where the new Revel M106, being a very modern design, is really going for that transparency. It's really going for that detail where you can really pick apart and analyze all the recordings a lot better.
And why the speaker really appeals to me, I think it does a good job blending the kind of like the
best of both
worlds. I hate saying that, but I really think in this case it really did.
The final comparison will be comparing the Model 3 to its bigger brother, the Model 5. Compared to the Model 5, of course, the Model 5 is quite a bit bigger. It is a 3-way speaker with a 10-inch woofer, so you are going to get quite a bit more bass presence out of that Model 5, a little bit more extension, a little bit more volume out of it, simply because that cabinet volume is quite a bit bigger. Sound-wise, I think, honestly, you can pretty much expect almost the same sound signature.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
One thing I know with the Model 5s, because I think that extra mid-range driver the soundstage sounds a little bit bigger, and I agree with the overall presentation. It's very similar. The one thing I would say, just determine by room size. You know, you have a little bit larger room, then maybe go that step extra and get the KLH H5. And also, you don't want to do the opposite either. If you got a smaller room, sometimes the worst thing you can do is put a too big speaker in that room. You know, just always don't make it that, oh, one's going to sound better than the other. See how it suits your environment and your room, and that's the way you should determine between getting its bigger brother or this speaker.
We really recommend the Model 3s for the listeners who have a small to medium room and maybe even have some weird constraints on where they can place the speakers as well. The fact that you can place these, they're not super fussy on exact placement away from the walls, so you can have them closer to the walls, so you can kind of have your decor more tucked in and don't have to have your speakers in the way.
To really keep that control of the acoustic suspension, and that I think would totally match with it, you know, we've got the Cambridge, the Evo 75, or of course the 150 would match very well with this. If you want more of that, I'll say more rounded off kind of sound, then the Hegel, and again, Hegel, because of its bass control, will really bring it out in this speaker, and it's going to work very well. Another one I think that just sonically would sound good. I'll tell you right now, I haven't tried it, but I am quite sure this is going to work. Is the Regobrito, and I don't know, maybe hopefully one day we'll just be able to match it. But I try it first, but I have a good feeling about that.
Thanks for watching our video today on the brand new KLH Model 3s. If you have any questions about the Model 3s or have a cool KLH story for us to know about, let us know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.